Somewhere beyond the recesses of time and space, two podcasters are set adrift in a machine, picking up transmissions of movies that are forgotten but not gone.
Welcome, everyone, to Movie Memory Machine, the only podcast about forgotten movies that changes its oil every 3,000 miles. I am your host, Landen Solano, joined always by my co-host, Truman Caps. Truman, it's good to see you.
Landen, it's groovy to be seen by you. And I want to ask, do you consider yourself a hedonist?
Oh, God, no. Not even a little bit. What's the opposite of a hedonist?
A monk, probably. Not Adrian Monk. Although also Adrian Monk from the TV show Monk does not party very hard, so.
I am definitely, well, I don't want to apply the term conservative to myself, but I'm too tired to be a hedonist. I'm just exhausted all of the time. I can't even fathom, like, I would like to do stand-up again, but
yeah.
Stand-up,
you gotta stand
like,
up.
Is a nighttime activity. I can't imagine going to a show that starts after 7 p.m. Like, I won't even go to a movie that starts after 7 p.m. anymore.
Yeah, and at least a movie doesn't require anywhere near as much participation as stand-up does. Like, there's no risk that you're going to go to the movie and the movie will start heckling you if it feels like you're not
right.
being well, or like, you know, either the movie won't heckle you or the movie won't do crowd work on you.
Well, once we see what AI does to the movies, maybe there will be some sort of interactive component, and it will make movies will start to shame me as I'm watching them.
I would never heckle a comedian, but I will absolutely heckle an artificial intelligence movie. Just you're gonna get roasted, sir.
And here's a question for you, though, because I was gonna go into this whole thing about supporting people who are hedonistic, but. Yeah. How to phrase this? I'm not into, like, the, you know, aristocratic, we have so much power that we only seek power for hedonism, which I read a book about Studio 54 for today's film.
Look at
that
you.
Was written by the second owner of Studio 54, and that book was about him acquiring power to be a hedonist. Even if that's not what he was explicitly saying, that's what it was, and it was a terrible book. I do not support that way of life. However, for those that need hedonism to escape the prison of their everyday lives, I can get behind that.
Okay, two things. First, the true opposite of hedonism is reading a book you don't like to do research for your podcast. There is nothing less hedonistic than that, so we've got that put away. Secondly, I would agree with you. I agree. Like, I think that the private island doing cocaine off of a sex worker's back kind of hedonism, I think the more money that you're spending on the hedonism, I feel like the less that I appreciate it. But at the same time,
yeah.
In thinking about this question, I was realizing I kind of feel like maybe I am a hedonist, but also in a very, 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 very low-key way. Like, by when I think of hedonism in my own life and the way I apply it, it's like, yes, I will play Baldur's Gate for 4 hours tonight instead of working on a script or creating something or editing my podcast.
But is anyone feeding you grapes while you do that?
Well, now that's the question. In the game, someone very well may be feeding me grapes. My character in Baldur's Gate 3, also a hedonist and is sleeping around like crazy. My character definitely slutting it up there. No one is feeding me grapes in real life. I think two reasons. One, I could not persuade my girlfriend to do that, and two, I don't like grapes. Good. So.
Oh yeah. Hey, I didn't know that. I don't like grapes either.
But we're not. All this time, trapped in this machine. That's why the grapes in the fridge are never getting eaten. That must be why.
You know what? Fuck the grapes of wrath. We're the wrath on grapes.
Fuck the grapes of wrath, an unauthorized porno parody. Eh? Is this anything?
Well, to go back to your question, and to our conclusions from the question, and to tie it into today's film, I think today's film shows both the hedonism of power and the hedonism of escapism.
Yes.
Which is kind of interesting. I hadn't thought of that until this very moment. So it's a new perspective to put on this film that I've already watched twice.
Yes, it has been on my mind since watching the movie, because I feel like this particular cut of the movie 54, I think tries to have it both ways with opinions about hedonism, and that gave me opinions.
I got so much to say. Truman, I am so excited to talk about today's film. I feel like I'm in the middle of an experience with it. I don't even feel like my experience with it is done yet.
Yes, watching this movie and thinking about this movie and living in the space of this movie has been huge for me, as what you and maybe some of our listeners know. I'm a huge Boogie Nights fan. The movie Boogie Nights is why
it's the cornerstone of your personality.
It is a lot of the stones. It's like at least it's at least one load-bearing wall.
I've seen Boogie Nights with you at least on 2 occasions out in the world, not even in your apartment.
Yeah, there may be depending on which of my birthdays you were. There was one birthday where a room full of people watched Boogie Nights with me, which is a very mid-20s Truman thing to do. Like, hey, everybody, watch this long movie with multiple graphic sex scenes in it. We'll all just sit together
suicide.
and watch it. Yeah, well, okay, you know. What does that say about me that I consider the sex scenes more awkward to watch with friends than scenes of violence? Boogie Nights is huge for me, and this movie is really water skiing behind Boogie Nights in so many ways.
It's unavoidable. And to talk a little bit about my experience with 54, after first watching it, my initial reaction was like, that is Boogie Lights. That is copyright-free Boogie Nights.
That is the New York Post headline review.
But upon learning that the theatrical cut, which was panned by critics and did not find an audience, when it was initially in theaters
in 1998,
was butchered by the Weinsteins, Harvey Weinstein in particular.
Yeah.
And that there's a director's cut out there that. Okay, let me get this out and then give us a synopsis, and we'll go into some specs about this movie.
Sure.
There's a director's cut out there that, you look at some things and it's like, oh, okay, they wanted, a little bit of a different, tone with certain things. There might be voiceover added that you don't want, which is the case here. But there is 40 minutes cut from the original director's vision, and then 30 minutes of reshoots added to this movie. That is substantial.
And the theatrical cut of this movie is like 90 minutes long. So you're looking at a third of the movie that was basically reshot at gunpoint and Harvey Weinstein holding the gun, which is going... Yeah.
Well, Disney was holding the gun to him, and he was holding the gun to Mark Christopher.
Oh, yes, you're right. Let's not be unfair to Harvey Weinstein, famous cool guy.
Well, no, no, I'm not. But I'm saying Disney is the one. Well, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Truman, tell people what 54 is about, and then let's dig into these specs.
Absolutely. It's 1979, and 19-year-old gas station attendant Shane O'Shea, played by Ryan Phillippe, is determined to break out of his humdrum suburban life in New Jersey to experience the glitz and glamour of New York City's hottest and most exclusive nightclub, Studio 54. Standing in the crowd outside the club, Shane catches the eye of 54's eccentric and mercurial owner, Steve Rubell, played by Mike Myers, who grants him entry and gives him a job as a shirtless bartender. As Shane is drawn into the world of casual sex, drug use, and glamorous debauchery inside the club, he forms a friendship with fellow waiter Greg, played by Breckin Meyer, and Greg's wife Anita, an aspiring musician, played by Salma Hayek. But when this hard-partying lifestyle begins to take its toll on his relationships, and the IRS takes an interest in 54's dubious finances, Shane seeks an escape from this world of glitz and glamour with soap opera day player and club regular Julie, played by Neve Campbell.
Okay, so today the machine has made us watch 54 from 1998. This was directed by written and directed both by Mark Christopher.
Yes, feature
film
debut,
as you said, starring, but not unfamiliar to the film scene, which we'll get into in a minute. And starring, as you mentioned, Ryan Phillippe, Salma Hayek, Neve Campbell, Mike Myers, Breckin Meyer, unrelated. And
but wouldn't it be funny?
Yeah. Okay. This movie was released theatrically August 28th, 1998.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I want to pull open a comparison number here too. So this had a budget of $13 million.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just $2 million less than Boogie Nights had.
Yeah.
Now, it is unfair, I think, to compare these two, but at the same time, it's an interesting lens in which to look at this. So, it's $2 million less, but this movie is released initially, first weekend, to, well, do you want to guess how many theaters?
I'm going to say for an R-rated movie that is an indie film and kind of a gamble in some ways, I'm going to say less than 1,500 theaters.
Do you have an official guess?
Okay, that can't be an official guess. I'll say 1,200 theaters.
1,200 theaters. It was released to 1,859 theaters, which is a pretty wide release for this film. And I think the R rating is only what's keeping it below 2,000.
Yeah, it's a pretty wide release for a movie with a fair amount of nudity, a fair amount of thrusting, and and a fair amount of drug use for the time.
Compare that to Boogie Nights, which
Gladly.
with $2 million more budget, opening weekend released in 2 theaters.
Wait,
and
where were those 2 theaters?
New York and Los Angeles. Then released second week to 30 theaters, then to 124 theaters. It has this kind of slow trickle word of mouth campaign vibe to it, whereas 54 is the blitzkrieg, as many theaters as we can, oversaturate the market, get people there, but then it's quickly trickles off.
Well, and but it also sort of makes sense because Boogie Nights debuted at the Toronto Film Festival on September 11th, 1997, and 54 was filmed over the course of 2 months in the autumn of 1997. So, yes, it's unfair to compare the two films, but also everybody on set, everybody involved in the creation of 54 had seen Boogie Nights, and I would assume probably liked it. The movie was pretty well received. It's also, I think, a great movie, one of our finest. But so it was sort of just that template was out there. Like, this is how you do the movie about edgy stuff in the 70s. And then also sort of, I think, explains why 54 got the wider release. Like, Boogie Nights was, like, it was some pretty risky subject matter. New Line Cinema was taking a gamble putting this movie out there. And I think that 54 got the big release that it did because Boogie Nights, they saw that become a critical darling. They saw it get a bunch of Academy Award nominations.
Yeah,
and
I'll go with you as far as like the release and distribution decisions. I won't go so far as like the creative decisions for the movie. Like, so much pre-production and script has to go into place before, years before a movie is created. So I think it's just like a Deep Impact / Armageddon situation.
I think, look, I agree that there's a lot of pre-production that happens, but also a lot of stuff changes in how a movie looks and what it is becoming when it's on set, when it's in the editing room, and just the fact that these performances were being done by people who had seen Boogie Nights. I will fully grant you, director and writer Mark Christopher has a very specific vision. He has his own thing that he was trying to do. By no means is he cribbing from Boogie Nights, but also he like, he saw a movie that was in the same zeitgeist and was probably inspired by it in a bunch of ways and learned a bunch of things from that process in trying to make his own movie that then he was not allowed to make thanks to a bunch of cool dudes in corner offices.
I'd be curious to see if he had seen it on set. I mean, there's no real verification one way or the other, but one thing that I think is certain is that when they went in and re-edited it, that they could more easily have given it that kind of how would you describe Boogie Nights' editing style? Just kind of pushing people through an era.
I mean, Paul Thomas Anderson himself referred to it as cocaine energy, a type of energy that Paul Thomas Anderson had quite a lot of in the late 90s. But the edit of it that we have in this theatrical cut is absolutely people who saw Boogie Nights saying, we want to make this Boogie Nights. We just want to do a Boogie Nights. And
I think that's probably why, like, I bet the concept and the seed of the script is independent from Boogie Nights, but then all of that stuff in post make it feel more like Boogie Nights, and it seems more so like Boogie Nights just because it's so more closely related in content as well.
Yes, and I don't know.
Anyway.
I would, and I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I also say there are aspects of Ryan Phillippe's performance where it's very much like this motherfucker's trying to do Mark Wahlberg in his best role ever. I think a little bit, and I enjoy a lot of the performances in this movie. I enjoy Ryan Phillippe in this movie. There are some choices he makes that I really like quite a lot, but I still and maybe I just like it because I love Mark Wahlberg in Boogie Nights. I don't know, but I think there's a lot of room in this space of movies about people doing hedonistic, drug-oriented, sexy stuff in the 70s. So I think it's a big tent, and there should be room for there to be multiple movies in that space.
Well, and I think we'll get into a longer discussion about new queer cinema at some point during this episode, in which there's such a culture that exists already that I'm less likely to attribute it to aping Mark Wahlberg than I am just kind of fitting into a larger conversation about what was going on. But
you don't want to give credit to Mark Wahlberg, another famously cool and chill dude who we have no problems with.
Let me finish going down some of the stuff here. This movie released August 28th, 1998 to 1,850 theaters. It debuted at number 4.
Nice.
And it was going up against Blade in the number 1 spot, and it was number 1 for 2 weeks in a row. So it had premiered the previous week.
Mm-hmm.
The number 2 spot was There's Something About Mary, which was in its 4th week.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And it came in just below Saving Private Ryan, which was in its 3rd week. And Saving Private Ryan comes in at number 3, just above 54.
Wow. I mean, honestly, fairly impressive for this movie to start out at number 4. I mean, again, when you've got a movie that is R-rated and kind of a hard R rating, and it's getting beaten by some real heavy hitters.
Yeah, absolutely. So it debuts at number 4. Then by its 2nd week, it drops to number 6, and then by the 3rd week, falls off the top 10 entirely.
Party's over.
It stayed in theaters for about 5 weeks total, on average.
Yeah.
So there was a good month in the month of September in 1998. You could see 54.
What a month!
Total. Here's the interesting thing: is it made domestically $16.7 million, so just over its production budget.
Okay, kind of break even, kind of a wash.
Despite what Boogie Nights does at festivals, it's not shown internationally. So this movie only has a total domestic box office for its theatrical cut of $16.7 million.
Is it just that culturally, like, maybe people overseas aren't as dialed into one specific nightclub, but everybody knows what porn is?
I don't think so. I mean, Studio 54, if any American club, is the international club.
Yeah,
at least of the 70s and early 80s. So
yeah,
I don't know. I think I would be curious to understand and hear why it didn't get an international distribution, unless it did, and I just didn't see it in any of my notes. But I looked and couldn't find anything.
It was just that Europe, they had a couple weeks to look at the reviews, and they're like, no, thank you. We do not want this. Keep it.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're talking about 90s movies. This is our first 90s movie where I do think the distribution model was way different then than it is today, where you almost, like, by default, start out the movie overseas and then bring it home.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Maybe it's easier to sell overseas. A lot of movies are made for the international market. I'm looking at you, Fasts and Furious.
Yeah. Yeah. Or what? Geostorm. In the case of Geostorm, they are made for the overseas market, and with just a couple of Americans imported to try and sell them here.
I'd throw our buddy Statham's movie The Meg in there as well as that type of movie.
Yeah.
But let's start getting into some stuff here. I want to hear more about your personal thoughts and experience with this. Okay, this is, I think, going to be a movie that really shows our age difference.
Yes.
Where was this on your radar when it came out? Had you seen it before? How did you feel about this movie? Where are you coming at to this conversation?
I'm trying to remember if I even to say that I saw a trailer for it would even be saying too much. Probably on TV during an episode of The Simpsons, there was we had it muted, and I was, I don't know, talking to my parents or something and glancing at the TV, and it's like shots of people discoing, and I'm like, oh, I like disco music, but. And it's a thing that I walked past at the video store on my way to go rent whatever movie I actually wanted to watch. But so yeah, that is my fullest experience with it. I was aware that it was out there. I was aware that it existed. It had not fully faded from my memory. Now, what about you? What was your experience?
Well, this is weird, but it's a movie that I was convinced for a long time that no one had actually seen.
And you've been proven wrong.
Only outside of you and me having watched it for this show, I only have met one person who's seen it. And that's only come up since I've been having conversations about this movie.
He's stopping everyone on the street and saying, "Excuse me, sir, have you heard the good news about the film 54?"
So I hadn't seen it, though this was very much in my awareness bubble at the time.
Yeah.
Because I think, there's not, here, maybe we can make some history here on Movie Memory Machine.
Wow.
You've heard of the Rat Pack.
Yes.
You've heard of the Film Brats.
Yes.
Which are the Spielberg, Scorsese. And you've heard of the Brat Pack, which is the John Hughes generation actors. To my knowledge, there's not a name for the group of actors that appeared in these teen movies in the late 90s. The Ryan Phillippe, Neve Campbell, Freddie Prinze Jr., Sarah Michelle Gellar, who else would I include in that? Breckin Meyer, Ethan Embry. There's no name for them. So, I don't know, maybe
the Splat Pack?
The Splat Pack! That's not a bad idea, because they were in a bunch of, like, horror movies. Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer.
There might be a better second draft of that in there somewhere, because you say Splat Pack to someone, and I don't know that blood is the first bodily fluid that springs to mind when you say that, so...
This movie?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it has levels, doesn't it? It can be blood, it can be other stuff.
The only thing that came to my mind was the All That Pack, because they're kind of a, especially Cruel Intentions. Selma Blair, I would also include in that. They are kind of that, like, privileged generation of, millennials, I guess you would call them.
Yes, but I think that the downside to that is that when you are referring to a bunch of actors in the 90s and you say the all that pack, you start thinking of another group of young people who were definitely not privileged. And
right.
I wish them all of the strength and good fortune and happiness in the world.
Oh, man. Let's go with Splat Pack. Just for our sake. Who knows if it'll catch on, but we'll call them the Splat Pack.
We're just, brick by brick, building the incomprehensible lore of our podcast.
The Splat Pack, they were huge. Like, those movies, Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer, Cruel Intentions, like, defined my high school era.
Yeah.
And there's so much crossover with those films. I would include a lot of the American Pie cast in that as well.
Sure.
So
More
Mina
splat.
Suvari and, like, lots of just intertangling of different, from movie to movie, there's going to be at least 2 or 3 of them working together. And so this movie has Neve Campbell, Breckin, Meyer, and Ryan Phillippe in it. I would include it in this as a Splat Pack movie.
I think that almost works to this movie's detriment in terms of, like, the way that it was treated by Miramax, because kind of they signed these actors who then wound up kind of getting really big with a teenage audience or with a younger audience, and then there's all this pressure on them in the cutting of the movie to, like, well, how do we foreground more of the teen idols? What do we do with all these teen idols in a movie that a lot of teens can't see, that is about shit that most teens weren't alive for?
And it's unfortunate, but we're gonna have to talk about that when we talk about Neve Campbell in a minute.
What we talk about when we talk about Neve Campbell, yes.
So anyway, long story short, I was aware of this movie, and like you, like, I worked at a video store in 2000, so right when this was coming out on DVD. I worked at Sam Goody in 1999, so right when this was coming out on DVD. I saw this on the shelf every day of my life, but I'd never seen it. I've never seen it before watching it today.
You had the most kind of aggressive marketing campaign for 54. You had to stare at it every day, and we're still like, nope, not gonna do it.
Well, I'll tell you, the thing that always intrigued me was, hey, it's a dramatic performance by Mike Myers.
Yes.
But the question becomes, even at the height of my love for Mike Myers, which has waned, why didn't I seek
like
it
Wayne's
out?
World, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I like what you did there.
But why? I like what you did last summer. What? But so yeah, but you didn't see it, even though you.
I never
were
did.
at
I never
peak
seeked it
Myers
out.
Mania.
I don't know why. I don't really have an explanation for that.
Probably because the word of mouth got to you. I mean, when a
There
movie
wasn't
has
a word
a
of
certain, well,
no one saw it. This is a movie that no one saw.
It was a movie that no one's, but the people who were paid to go see it and write reviews of it wrote bad reviews, and even if, like, there comes a point where if you know nothing about a movie other than, like, oh, everyone says that's bad.
I was not paying attention to reviews in 1998 through, the early 2000s. I saw Undercover Brother in theaters, so I was not looking at reviews. I saw Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo, or European Gigolo in theaters.
You had to go back for more. You're like, the Deuceverse must continue. I need to see I need to see where the legend takes us next.
So yeah, tell me what you thought of this film, or do you want to do that when we go into the kind of deep dive of this thing?
No. I'll tell you what I thought of this film. There is so very clearly a good movie. There are, like, there are thick chunks of good movie inside the kind of sludge of bad movie that is here. Like, and to call this a bad movie is, I think, sort of unfair, because there's so much interesting stuff and there is so much to like in here, and you can see the bones of something much better and much more thought-provoking and a very unique film in here that didn't get made. So, like, watching it was on some level a frustrating experience for me, because I'm seeing those bits and pieces and thinking, like, damn it, the writer and director had a vision that he was pursuing, and I really want to see what that movie is, because the scraps of it that I can see are great. We're going to talk about this more. But I think that Mike Myers' performance in this movie is transcendent. It's really, really good.
Okay. I can't wait to get into that.
Maybe it's just because, I'm also a Myers maniac, and my opinion of him has not descended as far because I basically haven't watched anything he's made in the past 20 years. I've decided I choose to stay in the 90s when his movies were good. But I think his performance as Steve Rubell has so much dimension to it. It has so much subtlety to it. He paints this portrait of a man who is both the master of this universe, who is also deeply sad and deeply lonely and trying to reach out to people. And it's upsetting to me that storyline doesn't really play out in what is here, and that a performance that good has been chopped up and cut up to be turned into what is basically like it's like they're trying to make Boogie Nights out of something that isn't Boogie Nights, and they're also trying to graft Goodfellas onto that as well.
Yeah.
I was
trying to think of how to talk about the Scorsese connection, and was struggling with it. You can feel Scorsese's imprint on this in not great ways.
It's frustrating because this is a movie, written and directed by a gay man who had previously directed a bunch of short films about, queer people, queer experiences. And this movie, to my understanding that we'll talk about, was a lot more about queer experiences, which were a big part of what Studio 54 was. And to see the movie that he wrote, researched over the course of several years, and directed get reformulated into a half-hearted attempt at a Paul Thomas Anderson movie and a half-hearted Goodfellas homage is the straightest thing possible, and I feel really bad that happened to this film.
Yeah, let's use that to segue into talking about this movie. This movie we talked about, there's a director's cut. We're going to cover the director's cut next week. Because I don't think it's possible to weigh a verdict on this unless we see everything. And this is coming from someone, I'm not super big on the auteur theory, but this is clearly a dismantling of a product, whether it comes from one person's mind or a collective. It changed what it was in its last moments to be something it wasn't and is lesser for it. And I think we need to see what the initial intention was in order to fully verify if this should be sent back to modern memory.
Yeah.
This movie was cut, re-edited, reshot by a mandate from Disney, who owned Miramax, which was the Weinstein's company, to remove a lot of the homosexuality and the bisexuality and some of the drug use.
Yes.
And what ends up happening, since you were already talking about the Steve character, is troubling to me. Because you have someone that is trying to put together a tapestry of a time and place that included, these experiences for genders and sexualities across the board.
Yeah.
And what we end up with, having all of that cut out of Ryan Phillippe's storyline, is Mike Myers' Steve Rubell is really the only one who displays homosexual and bisexual tendencies, if that's the right word. Forgive me if I'm not phrasing that right.
Yeah.
But he's also the villain, and it's shown as lowly deviant behavior, which is completely antithetical to the initial intention of this movie.
Yes. It also just kind of fundamentally makes the story confusing to try and tell a story about the disco era, which was, gay people were a massive part of creating and participating in that, and to also tell a story about 54. Studio 54, a bar that, as seen in the movie, all of the bartenders are hot shirtless men. There are men dancing in cages, but then in all of the crowd scenes, it's always just men and women dancing together. They're trying to make it this is a place that has all the trappings of, if not an outright gay bar, then, you know, clearly a space that is welcoming to gay people, straight people alike. And the movie is just trying to make it out like, oh, this is Cheers, basically. It's just, and there just happen to be shirtless guys all
where
over
everybody
the place.
doesn't care what your name is.
Exactly. And the other thing is that over the course of the movie, you know, Ryan Phillippe, he is hired on the basis of basically he's really good looking. He takes his shirt off to get into the bar in the first place. He's hired. He's a bartender there. He is sort of close to Steve Rubell, Mike Meyer's character. And there's sort of a montage in the middle where he's talking about, and I was just getting more and more successful. And like he does a photo shoot for a magazine full of pictures of shirtless men, but they never really explain what the magazine is or why it is. It's just like, I was in this magazine, and then like, and he's going to parties that Steve's rich friends are at, and he is at one point, he pulls up driving a fancy car he seems to have bought with a vanity plate, and he's known as Shane 54, but they never really explain, wait, what is he getting famous for?
This is the ultimate fault of the film, and there's a lot of things I want to track between this version of the film and the director's cut.
Sure.
To me, the biggest, and there's a lot of holes in this that they've tried to patch over with voiceover.
Yes. Badly.
But my biggest question is, what the fuck is it that Shane wants out of life in this movie? Like,
yes.
I don't even really understand why he wants to leave home, except when you look at it through the new queer cinema lens of stories of characters that can't be themselves in, you know, a lot of times family environments.
Sure, yeah.
And need to go find themselves elsewhere. What we get with his family here at the beginning, and the comparison to Boogie Nights is impossible to look at here, and in not a great way.
Yeah.
Is in Boogie Nights, you know, he goes home, he has this explosive relationship with his mother. It's semi-abusive, if not completely abusive.
It's overtly abusive, yeah.
He needs to get out, and you believe that, and you feel that viscerally. Here, like, he's got two sisters, and his dad is a widower, and the real conflict I can just get is, like, he's depressed and unhip. Like, and
yeah.
Ryan Phillippe needs to get out of the house because of that. I don't quite feel why he needs to get out, unless it's my identity is being, you know, suppressed.
Yes, exactly. There's all this voiceover that's in there at the beginning, shots of him working at a gas station where it's like, oh, I knew there was more for me out there, but, you know, my dad just thought that High Life was a TV dinner and a can of Schlitz and a, you know, Lawrence Welk special on TV. And it's like, well, that's not like a really tragic backstory for, you know,
Right.
I don't see how that's propelling you. And also in his relationship, like, his sisters love him and he's really close with them. And even his relationship with his dad is kind of dismissive of Studio 54, but like after his first night at the club, he's just telling his sisters and his dad at the breakfast table, like, yeah, I was at 54 last night. It was great. And even his dad seems to kind of disapprove, but when he's asking to borrow his dad's car so he can go back to the club the next night, his dad never even really says no. There's then a shot of him stealing the keys, but it's like no one is telling him don't go to that club.
Yeah. That kitchen table scene where he's talking about it, like, it passed over me the first time I watched it, but once I was looking at it through this new lens, like, Mark Christopher did this other short film that was part of a popular independent series of films called Boy's Life. An anthology of short films. He did this short film called Alkali, Iowa.
Yeah.
And there's another similar scene around, about a family around a kitchen table that is all about talking around the dark secrets of their family and the dark secrets of their identities.
Mm-hmm.
When I watched this scene in 54 a second time, I'm like, there is something that is unspoken between the characters, but there's also something unspoken between me and the movie.
Yes.
Where, like, when you start to layer on, because he stops himself. Ryan Phillippe is talking about being there. And he's like, then I went up to the balcony and he like stops. and doesn't say anymore because he's afraid of what his dad will respond with. If you add in like the homosexual layer to that, then there's a reason that he's nervous about talking about the areas he's in within Studio 54. He's being exposed to different cultural things that his father might be opposed to. That we don't get that in the theatrical cut here.
In the theatrical cut, like what happens when he goes up in the balcony is we see him having sex with a lady, and
we see him watching someone else have sex with a lady.
Oh, that's later that he goes up there and has sex. There's a lot of people looking at people having sex in this movie. They cut out pretty much every reference to gay life, but they kept in plenty of shots of topless women gyrating. Like that we can run with. That's okay.
And there, it's hard, and I wouldn't want to attribute, a blanket trope to, a film movement, but there's certainly, without doubt, some films that have a voyeuristic lens within this, queer cinema that is impossible to separate out from a lot of the watching in this movie. The gaze, if you will.
Sure.
Gaze, not Gays.
Yes, an important thing to clarify. To the whole point about you feel like your dialogue with the movie is limited, like the movie isn't telling you everything. I mean, I think that, again, that goes back to just the whole arc of the movie, this supposed rise and fall of Shane 54, him getting so famous and successful and infamous within the club. I mean, looking at this movie and, like, if you try to read between the lines or try to see the original intent, it seems like the reason that he is getting so popular with the clientele of the club is because he is presumably having sex with wealthy older men as well as women. He is kind of a kept man for Steve Rubell, and that's how he's attaining all of this wealth and power. It would be an interesting thing to see how that dynamic plays out between him and Steve, and to explore these aspects of his character. But the movie is afraid of showing us that, so it's just, he gets really successful and famous as a bartender. Don't ask why. They're gonna dance for a while. Hey, needle drop. You like that disco song, don't you?
What's interesting about that is, like, yes, he is a kept man for Steve, but not for Steve, just by Steve.
Yeah.
For other people.
Yes.
Like, you talked about the bartender part.
Yes.
The head bartender is a coveted position.
Yes.
And this is another fault, and something I want to track between this and the director's cut is, at no point do I understand why. Why, like, I don't know the appeal outside of just being part of the culture, why this is a coveted position, why people would vie for it, why people would backstab their friends for it. We're just kind of introduced to the idea of the head bartender being the position everyone wants through, entering into a middle of a conversation almost.
The whole concept of being the head bartender at Studio 54 is something that is introduced in voiceover and then kind of comes up again in a bunch of very sweaty later scenes in the movie. And I mean sweaty in their implementation. People are sweating a lot in this movie in general due to both the dancing and the cocaine. But there are a lot of conversations between Shane and his friend Greg as the movie goes on, where, like, first Shane has gotten the head bartender position instead of Greg, who's been there longer, and it's sort of like, oh, did he backstab Greg? And then it's like him trying to get the head bartender job for Greg as it goes on, but there's this whole fight between them about, is he going to get it or is he not? It sort of comes out of nowhere in the last 30 minutes of the movie. It doesn't really matter. We're not really clear why this is such a big deal, and it seems like so much less interesting and so much lower stakes than a lot of the other stuff going on. This very much feels like stuff that was this was in the reshoots. It was like, major plot lines have been cut out of this. We need you to come up with some other new thing to get us to this predetermined endpoint using the material we have. And probably in like 3 days in a writer's room, they came up with, okay, what about being the head bartender? That's the plot line. Like, I have been in my truncated career writing in Hollywood, I have been in situations where it's like, okay, we have to redo this thing into this thing. What is any kind of plot point we can grab onto and hang the rest of the story on? Yes, it sucks, but there's money on the line. We have to just do it. And I think that is what happens here.
My understanding is, and I haven't done too deep a dive on the director's cut because I'm excited to just go into it blind. Yeah. Is most of the reshoots having... Okay, so the 40 minutes that was cut had a lot to do with bisexual relationships. I would assume some of that is with Steve Rubell. I don't know if that's between Ryan Phillippe's character and Mike Myers. A lot of it was between Ryan Phillippe and Greg Breckin Meyer, which was almost entirely cut out. Now, that plays a massive part of the film, their relationship. You can feel it being more of the spine of the film, and it was replaced with 30 minutes of reshoots between Ryan Phillippe and Neve Campbell. Neve Campbell, who was supposed to just be a cameo in this movie. Yeah. And the reshoots with her are just some of the worst things in this movie. The scenes that were reshot, or the scenes that were written and then shot after the fact with Neve Campbell are almost certainly what got this movie the bad reviews.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of other gaping plot holes in here. Like, the things that were cut, period, got this movie the bad reviews. The Neve Campbell stuff, that they shoehorn in, again, in the last 30 minutes of the movie, suddenly this woman who he's talked about or seen in passing a couple times is suddenly like, oh, they're bowling together, they're having this meet cute, this, like, and it's this whole
hotel
sense,
and the bowling scenes are unwatchable.
It's rough, and it's also sad because, like, I like Neve Campbell's performance. Like, I think she's
okay. I got to talk about Neve Campbell for a second. She is one of, I feel, the most underrated actresses that we've had. Mm-hmm. This movie does not show that.
No,
because I think it's hard when you go 2 months after you finish a movie to go back and try to get into character and make it believable with all this kind of flimsy exposition dialogue. But when you look at her performance in the Scream movies, or she's really just, there's a depth of emotion and authenticity to her that just doesn't exist in a lot of the other actors of the Splat Pack.
Yeah. It's catching on already.
I'm very, very impressed with her. This movie does her dirty that way, to, like, give her the most mundane, saccharine thing ever. Like, we're gonna go on a first date and go bowling. Like, what is this? Like, Leave It to Beaverland almost.
And to set it up as, like, this contrast between the debauchery of Studio 54, and then, oh wait, this is your way out. It's this clean and wholesome, girl next door who can save you, even though she goes to the club a lot. So she, like,
and it, from scene to scene, her motivation changes based on the reshoots. Where it's
that's true of almost every character in the movie, but yes.
Yeah. But also, I think that's almost entirely due to the reshoots.
Oh, certainly.
Let me just kind of put this in context of her career, because there's something important with her that we need to talk about. Okay, a lot of the marketing on this movie hangs on the sex appeal of Neve Campbell, and this is tricky waters. I wanna tiptoe carefully into them. The late 90s was a difficult time. For culture.
Yeah.
For women specifically. Not that, there were other times that weren't as bad, or et cetera, et cetera. But
these are tricky waters that we've tiptoed into, but I know I'm throwing you a life preserver.
Thank you. Neve Campbell is an actress who seems to have had an undue amount of pressure on her to be a sex object, that she resisted, I think, her entire career, and suffered opportunities because of it. Now, I'm speculating on that, but when you look at something like Wild Things, where she refused to do a nude scene, there's a great, if you go listen to Katrina Longworth's series, you must remember this exotic 90s. There's an amazing episode about Wild Things and Neve Campbell's involvement in that film there. What was other movies she's done? 54 being one that is very, all about sex and drugs and that culture. And she isn't starring in PG-13 movies. She's in Scream, The Craft, Scream 2 right before this. And she's in one of the edgiest teen TV shows of Party of Five, almost all through the 90s. She's got this kind of alt, girl next door, but sex bomb kind of thing that the studios are trying to market her as.
Yeah.
And so when you get her in this movie, it feels like a marketing ploy to try to hook into that, to sell it as a kind of sexy romance. And it doesn't work at all, and it feels very exploitative of Neve Campbell.
It feels exploitative of Neve Campbell, and it also, to some level, feels exploitative of the audience to be like, oh, Neve Campbell, you like her? You like her?
Yeah.
Neve Campbell's in this movie, guys. Neve Campbell's in it. See, look, she's got like 4 scenes right at the end of the movie. See, and they totally gel with the rest of the movie. It's fine. Don't ask questions. Like,
I don't know if you sat through the credits, but there's a like post credits moment of a disco ball descending, and Neve Campbell with her arms outstretched, a wind machine kind of blowing this billowy like goddess garb that she's wearing as she kind of cradles the disco ball as it comes down, as if she's like the goddess of disco. And it's like, what the fuck is that moment all about?
We don't even see her really dancing in the movie. The sum total of her role is her walking into and out of the club a couple times, and then bowling, and her in a car talking to Ryan Phillippe on the street while he's wrapping himself in trash bags inexplicably.
Oh my god, that scene, that moment was part of the reshoot, and was the like boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl again moment. That moment became parody. The movie became Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story to me.
To emphasize the crassness of this, again, we're in the last 30 minutes of the movie. He's home for Christmas. He's kind of on the outs with both his family and the club. He bumps into Neve Campbell, who is a soap opera B actress who he has kind of... a couple times he's seen her at the club. He's seen her in the paper. He's talked about how she's beautiful. They chat, they strike up a connection, they go bowling, and then it's like suddenly they kiss after bowling, and I really like you, I feel like you're different. Holy shit, where's this coming from? They just met. Then
hey,
next
Shane,
thing,
we're Jersey.
Also, this whole notion of like, it's shameful to be from New Jersey. How many people in New York City are from New Jersey? It's right across the river. I don't know. Okay,
to that point, just as a quick aside, this is the first movie that made me realize the proximity to Jersey and New York. I've heard about it my whole life, but this is the first movie that like showed me there's a now forever living in my mind, having never been to Jersey or New York. There's just a wrought iron fence that separates the two states, and Jersey people have to stay on their side of the fence and stare at the New York skyline, never being able to go over.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I guess you haven't been paying close attention to the news. When they talk about the border crisis, it's the border between New Jersey and New York City. They want to keep all those bridge and tunnel people out. Some of them, I'm sure, are good people. The point is, we've seen them like have their meet cute, and like 2 minutes later they're kissing, and it's like they're talking suddenly like they're building this really deep and committed love. Couple scenes later, like the last night at the club, as everything is falling apart, he runs into Neve Campbell, who's there with another guy, and he's like, what the fuck, who's this guy? And she's like, well, it's good for my career, and like, we need to do things. And he's like, no, that's not okay, that's not all right. Which makes absolutely no sense for Ryan Phillippe to take that position when he has been fucking everyone in the club, when he works at a nightclub with a balcony for people to fuck each other, for him to suddenly be like, it's ridiculous that you would be dating a separate guy.
The film doesn't do a great job of showing that he's sleeping with everyone, in my opinion. They say it a few times. Salma Hayek says it a few times. Breckin Meyer, I think, says it once or twice.
He gets chlamydia at one point.
I mean, there's that, yes.
There's the chlamydia,
there's one kind of series of shots where he goes to bed with a girl, and then he rolls over in another shot, and it's a different girl. And then he gets up from the bed, and we see Ryan Phillippe as he walks to the bathroom. It's a different girl.
We see his butt. Landon refers to male actors' butt cheeks as their last name. I'm trying to get him to stop.
Last name pluralized.
Pluralized last name. Just again, yet another brick in the wall of impenetrable lingo.
But through that series of shots, like, it wasn't until my second watch that I realized that it was a different girl in each shot.
I mean, regardless of how clearly they've drawn the line that he's having a lot of sex at the club, if you work at a club where, like, everybody is on coke all the time and everyone there is having sex constantly, I don't see how you then can get on your moral high horse about, oh, the girl I've been on one date with is here with a different guy, and yeah, I'm drawing a line in the sand. But they have this big fight, and then, like, seemingly, based on the way the film is edited, like, everything falls apart. The IRS and the FBI come in to bust the club, and Ryan Phillippe is walking down the street after this, and Neve Campbell pulls up in a limo and is like, hey, I'm sorry, you're right. That's not how I want to do things. I really care about you, and I want to be with you. So it's like, they have done their whole boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back thing in like 4 scenes at the last 20 minutes of a movie that I was told was going to be about Studio 54.
I forgot that we started talking about this because of the trash bag, and I really don't want to pass by the trash bag moment without really painting out how ridiculous it is. It's at the end of the movie. The IRS, which we haven't even talked about that part yet, but the IRS raids Studio 54. The party ends. Everyone's kicked out on their own, and Ryan Phillippe literally has to leave the party mid-party, no shirt, and he's walking down the winter streets of New York. No snow, of course, and he just kind of like tears, like, he's walking by some just trash on the side of the street and kind of, bear claws at it and grabs a trash bag, and he's just like struggling to like put it over his shoulder so that it can cover him like a shawl as Neve Campbell's limo pulls up alongside of him. And it was just the most blatant contrast. And his stupid wig, oh my god, the reshoots. Can we talk about the wig work in the reshoots?
I feel like I'm really bad at noticing wigs. I just assume that every piece of hair I see in a movie is that person's natural hair. I'm wig blind, Landon.
Wow.
What's going on with the wigs?
The wig is just like, I could barely watch the scene, and I could barely absorb anything that was happening in the scene because I just could not take my eyes off of Ryan Phillippe's curly hair wig. I mean, It's like he put a Harpo Marx wig on.
Yeah.
It's like I expected him to walk in honking a horn and chasing Neve Campbell around the room, cutting off people's ties.
Listen, for all we know, that could be in the director's cut. Yet another reason that it's been so well received. Look, his weird curly hair, which I now know is a wig, that a big plot point in this seems to be that Ryan Phillippe's character is so beautiful, he's so sexy, and everyone just wants to be around him. And it's like, I'm not going to say that Ryan Phillippe in the 90s isn't good looking, but it's like I'm looking at him like, is he great looking? That hair is really weird. And like, I don't know, he takes his shirt off to get into the bar, and there's all these people fussing over how, he's like a Greek god, he's cut from glass, and it's like, okay, he looks better than I do with my shirt off. I'll give him that, but it's like, are you really the hottest guy who's shown up at Studio 54 tonight? Maybe I'm nitpicking too much. I don't want to body shame.
I feel woefully inadequate to discuss such things, but he's definitely beautiful. I mean, he's got a model-esque look to him. I don't think he's completely miscast as far as that's concerned. I think...
Yeah.
I mean, it's a different era. Now it would be like Alexander Skarsgård with his Tarzan body, but...
Hello now. Hello. Now I'm interested. Okay, now let's talk. Okay, Skarsgård in this...
I could see it. When Steve Rubell hires him, and he's like, there's a voiceover saying, oh yeah, I got someone to tip off Steve to give me an interview, and I heard that he asked some hard-hitting questions, and Steve Rubell walks out of the office and goes, what's 2 + 2? He goes, 4? He's like, you got the job. And he walks back and goes, you're right, he's beautiful, and he sits down. Like, within the world that the film creates, I totally buy it. I have no question about that.
That's fair. And maybe like me not fully being able to appreciate how good looking Ryan Phillippe is.Maybe this is one of the drawbacks of two straight guys talking about a new queer cinema movie. But I look, and I think that gets to something that I like and I wanted more of, is that Mike Meyer's character is drawn to him. Mike Meyer's character likes him, whether it is, well, obviously it's lust, but there's got to be other stuff. I feel like that relationship between them is so interesting, and so much of it is cut out and left out. I mean, can we talk more about Mike Myers?
Yeah, let's focus on Steve Rubell, and we have so many other amazing things to talk about here. But let's do a focus on Steve Rubell. Let's focus on Mike Myers. I just want to put this into context of where Studio 54 falls on his career. Yeah. Studio 54, August 1998. We already talked about that. Massive hit the year before. Unexpected massive hit with Austin Powers, the international spy, man of mystery.
Yeah, international spy. What are you talking about?
I got it mixed up with the second one.
The international spy is Orson Fortune. Austin Powers is the international man of mystery.
God,
imagine
Jason Statham would 100% be in an Austin Powers movie if it was made now. He would not as Austin Powers, but he would be in it.
But also, I like the thought of Orson Fortune just very grimly dancing around the streets of swinging London. Like, all the backup dancers behind him like an Austin Powers, but it's just frowning Jason Statham, just going like, it's shagadelic, bruv.
So Austin Powers, the first one comes out the year before this. Mike Myers doesn't have anything really before Austin Powers. 1993... So there's a 4-year gap there. Wayne's World 2 was 93, and so was So I Married an Axe Murderer.
Yeah.
Before that, 1992 is Wayne's World, and he's on SNL until early 1995, I think. So that's kind of where he's at. 2 years after SNL, he does Austin Powers. So that's a gap in his... I mean...
Can you explain this gap in your resume, Mr. Myers?
It is a little bit of a gap in his resume to come back. And so what's interesting to me is 54, and this is the question I have for you, Truman.
Yeah.
Comes right on the height of success. What do you think Mike Myers' Oscar campaign looked like?
Well, I don't know what an Oscar campaign looked like in the 90s. Like, I can imagine now what the kind of like, what sort of for your consideration billboards would be up, him holding 2 champagne glasses or something.
There was a couple years ago, or was it last year, 2 years ago? Who knows? Andrea God, what's her last name? From Mandy, Andrea Riseborough. She had a controversial Oscar campaign where she paid her own way onto the ballot and into variety ads and stuff like that, and people really did not like the way she campaigned. I kind of feel like Mike Myers would have done the same thing. Like, oh my God, I have all this money from Austin Powers. Let me buy my own ad space.
I mean, yeah, or the way Bradley Cooper kind of went with the Maestro and doing the same kind of really, really try-hard campaign. I mean, look, the thing is, in the good version of this movie, again, we'll see with the director's cut, I could make the argument for him getting nominated for supporting actor for this, because there's this scene, one of the, I feel like, good scenes that's left intact, where Breckin Meyer's character gets invited back to Mike Myers' place. Like, Mike Myers...
This is about the bartender role. If you want the bartender role.
Yes. Mike Myers basically comes out of the club being carried by this suited man who seems to be his bodyguard or something, and say, "Oh, come back with me. He's got this trash bag full of cash. He'll carry the cash back." They're back at the house. Mike Myers' bodyguard sets him down, and he's able to stand completely. It's not like he needed to be carried.
That whole thing felt like a Mike Myers-ism.
It did feel like a bit that he came up with on set, which I like. But then, it's this, he's got the bag of cash, then he empties it on his bed, the bodyguard goes and just sits in a chair in the corner and starts reading a comic book, and Breckin Meyer is there and he's kind of weirded out. Mike Myers is lying on this pile of money on the bed, and he's very drunk, but he is, like, basically asking Breckin Meyer to let him give him a blowjob, and that if he does, then he'll give him the job at the bar. And... this is the way the scene plays out, where Breckin Meyer says no. He says, "No, I'm sorry, I'm not gay." And Mike Myers' character is like, "Oh yeah, I'm not either," And he's
talking about the labels. We're in an era now where labels don't mean anything. That
yes,
we all live in gray areas, and
yeah, and it's this scene that is this really kind of powerful portrait of, like, we've seen what this man has created. We've seen how he runs this place and how he rules over it. And then we see just how empty his life is, and that he is, and also this kind of unsettling vibe of, like, he's propositioning him, and this other guy is sitting in the room, just in the corner, reading a comic book. The scene ends with him vomiting onto the money, which is typically not a thing I love to see in a movie, but it's like
that's right. I forgot about that.
It's there's an intimacy to the scene, and a way in which this character is portrayed that is, like, not making a joke out of it, not making a bit out of him, but, like, giving a look at, like, he's got the world and he's still looking for something, which I think in the better movie would then set up, like, he has this void he's seeking to fill, and Ryan Phillippe is going to be that guy. There's also a scene at the end of the movie when Ryan Phillippe is the first to find that the IRS and the FBI is raiding the bar, and he goes running back up to Mike Myers' character and tells him, like, the FBI's here, and he says, "Oh yeah, I guess they're finally on to me." And he says, "Aren't you gonna run?" And Mike Myers just goes, "Where would I go?" And it's in the middle of the just clusterfuck that is the end of this movie. Just such a mess. That kind of gave me chills. Like, the way he just delivers that line, "Where would I go?" Like, this is... He builds so much and puts so much heart into his performance that even in these little fragments of it that we get, there is so much there to hold on to in those moments that in so many ways redeems... Well, I don't know. I can't say that you redeem the cut of this movie, but, like... it is just... I think about so much, and it sticks with me in the way that moments in other forgotten movies do not.
Yeah, my biggest note for this was, is Mike Myers great or terrible? To me, he kind of rides that line, and I do think a lot of it has to do with the reshoots and the editing. Because one thing that's unfortunate for the character is so much of it takes place in this drab back room of Studio 54, all of his exposition and acting scenes. Yeah. It is, the scene with Breckin Meyer and the bed full of money. Side note, I just, in my brain, I only keep seeing a fake blooper in my head of Mike Myers saying he wants to offer him an indecent proposal.
In my head, I'm just seeing the poster for the new children's adventure film, Breckin Meyer and the Bed Full of Money.
That scene is so conflicting to me, because you're exactly right in terms of it being interesting and setting up compelling character and situation. But because all of the bisexuality and all of this, everything else that's been cut out of the movie, that it should be a scene about abuse of power, and it is, but because of the way that he's trying to, like, break down Breckin Meyer's inhibitions, it kind of becomes problematic in that it's the only representation of, kind of bisexual or homosexual
lifestyle
or
desire.
Well, not even though it, like,
it's not lifestyle. Yeah,
it's very transactional, and it, because that it's the only conversation about a sexual act before the act happens. It feels manipulative. It feels deviant, it feels gross, and what should be a really, really powerhouse scene to me becomes a very problematic scene in a not great way.
As presented, as given to us in this cut of the movie, yes, I agree. I guess I basically, everything that I like in this movie, I am looking at in the context. I'm looking at it in a vacuum, divorced from even what the previous shot was, and I'm just like, okay, I am viewing this for anything that I like. I am assuming that's stuff that the Weinsteins didn't mess with.
Actually, I want to mention this right now too. I don't know how much you got into the history of Studio 54.
Quite a lot.
But you did. So what I found interesting, and this was illuminated by the totally awful audiobook I listened to, that Studio 54 was owned and run by two people, not just Steve Rubell.
Yes.
There was also, what was his name? Ian Schrager.
Yeah.
And in the book that I read for this was written by Mark Fleischer, who was the owner after the IRS scandal took down Steve and Ian.
Mm-hmm.
He bought Studio 54. He reopened it with the kind of same spirit, but never quite hit the same heights. But he says in the preface of that book that this movie, 54, didn't get any of it right. And when he asked Harvey Weinstein why it only has Steve and not both of them, he's like, Harvey Weinstein said, quote, "I couldn't do that to my friend Ian," end quote.
Oh, wow. What a nice guy Harvey Weinstein is. What a charitable, nice, great guy.
So I just find that interesting that like there's even a deeper story. I think this is a case where reality is stranger than fiction. And
oh, certainly.
Did you watch the documentary about Studio 54 on Netflix?
I did not, but I do know, like, I've read about some of the stories from it, including that people were so desperate to get into Studio 54 that one person tried to crawl in through the air vents, got stuck, and died. And
oh, shit.
That would have been a thing to put in the movie, guys. I mean, that's...
Well, there was a movie, Detroit Rock City, where they try to get into a club through the air vents and end up the air vent breaks and falls into the party. So it might have been too close on the heels of that movie.
I mean, given how wild some of the partying gets at Studio 54, people probably would just think that was part of the show. I mean, especially, if a bunch of, like, ceiling tiles are disintegrating and it looks like white powder, they're just going to assume that's more cocaine falling from the ceiling.
Let me ask you this, too, kind of taking a broader scope. What are your feelings about movies that take place at real places or real events, or even about real people like Steve Rubell, but then surround it and pad the story out with fictional characters and fictional events? It seems like an odd mixture if it's not done right.
I mean, I think that everything is odd if it's not done right. I mean, doing a thing right versus doing it poorly is really that's the dividing line between a thing working or not working.
You burned the shit out of me with that one.
Look, I think I understand it. I think it makes sense. I've spent the past 4 or 5 years writing a script about a Renaissance artist who was a real dude, and I've had to. I guess most of the other characters in it around him are real people, but there are a few cases where I combined a couple people into one person.
Yeah.
There are some plot events in his life that I've massaged or changed around a bit, simply because when you are trying to make an entertaining story out of a true story, you have to fictionalize things, you have to make certain choices to change things, and that like, if a complete fealty to the exact events and the exact people as they were, like, that will ultimately produce a boring and unsatisfying movie. And you might argue that kind of wound up happening with a theatrical cut here anyway, but I feel like that's warranted when you're trying to adapt a true story for the screen. You have to put some fiction in there.
So, okay, I have a couple things to say to that. One is I'm gonna dox you a tiny bit in that you wrote a story about Caravaggio.
Well, Caravaggio.
Caravaggio. my pronunciation's not great.
Yeah. Well, I
as
mean, you're
say,
both Italian.
Pronunciation.
Yeah.
There's a reference to Caravaggio in this movie.
Caravaggio.
When Steve Rubell gets Truman Capote a gift. There's a little Cupid that descends from the sky that looks very much like the Caravaggio. You would know the name of the painting, which is
that Sacred Love and Profane Love, where there's the Cupid who's stepping on the
maybe. There's that very famous painting of a adolescent or a teen or a child, kind of looking over his shoulder.
Oh, I mean, is that might be one of the that might be Bacchus actually, but
okay. No, well, okay. I mentioned this because Caravaggio is a movie directed by Derek Jarman, who was a staple of the new queer cinema.
Ah, yes, Caravaggio, another one of history's famous queer people. Yeah, I mean, look, I guess I wasn't paying super close attention to the scene where Truman Capote is given a gift by a Cupid, a small child lowered from the ceiling at a club full of sex acts and drugs. That's the most that I don't approve of. I was not paying attention because when in the middle of the movie, Mike Myers comes on the microphone and just yells, Truman, are you out there? Having a name like mine, I don't often hear my name said unless someone is talking to me, or maybe if they're talking about a president who dropped some bombs on a country. But
I have a very similar situation to you.
Yeah, exactly. So the fact that happens once, and that later in voiceover, again, Ryan Phillippe is going like, everybody's saying, hey Truman. I'm like, who the fuck is Truman? And I'm sitting there like, Truman is the guy who's going to comment on you saying that on his podcast.
Well, okay, this is the last thing I want to talk about as far as the broad scope of this movie and its real history. What is peculiar here, and I don't think this is a situation of reshoots cutting down or anything like that, is Studio 54 was known as the celebrity hangout. I mean, It was like the place for celebrities to go to unwind and relax, and you get all, we see the montage of still photos at the end of the movie of these weird amalgamations of people hanging out together.
Stallone is there, Truman Capote's there, Andy Warhol is there, Elizabeth Taylor,
Cary Grant, Gilda Radner, across the board.
Yeah, Robin Williams.
So outside of one instance of Truman Capote and one instance of Andy Warhol, the movie and mention of Princess Grace, there's no celebrities to be found in it, and it's a gaping hole in the movie, which
one
is
of many.
Yeah, that's the only thing as far as like shifting it from reality to fictionalize it, or I'm like, yeah, it maybe would have been hokey to have celebrity lookalikes just as like cameos or whatever, but it feels like it doesn't, like, I don't really get the specialness of the club without all of that. I feel like it's kind of like exposition is telling me this is a special club and a special place without me really experiencing it with the people that are there.
Yeah. I guess I somehow, just by virtue of knowing that famous people would go to the club and that they kind of talk about it, I don't know. I guess that didn't really occur to me much until now that, we don't really see that. And I think the movie does a fairly decent job of making the club look fun to be at. Like, just watching the scenes of people there dancing and having a good time, it's like, okay, this isn't boring. Like, this is kind of fun to watch, in just these moments, just in terms of what's being represented here. So I guess I was just coasting enough off of like, 54 is a fun place to be. I wasn't really thinking about the fact that, I guess you're right. They keep saying there's famous people here, and the only ones we see are Truman Capote and Andy Warhol, who I don't know that either of them would be a great hang. I don't know if I'd want to. I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe they would.
I don't listen.
Maybe not. It's one of those things. Like, what scenario would you want to hang out with Truman Capote? I would want to have mid-afternoon coffee with him.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Just gab.
I don't want to be like shouting at him on a dance floor while one or both of us is on amyl nitrate. Like, and it's a shame. I have the perfect in with Truman Capote as well.
You do.
So I mean, that's I guess I could meet him anywhere really, and at least have one thing to say.
Go ahead.
I have to speak a little bit to the real history of 54 and the way it intersects with this movie.
Okay.
A recurring character in the movie who I love a lot is an old lady who they call Disco Dottie, who she is at the club every night, partying, dancing, ruling the dance floor. Everybody just loves her. Like Mike Myers' character, who is like, a whole thing is that he's extremely selective about who gets in. Like there's all this stuff about how some nights the club will keep it almost empty just because he wants to preserve this air of exclusivity. He's always letting her in. She's always there having a great time, cracking wise with people, being horny and on drugs. So this is based on a real person. Her name was Sally Lipman. They called her Disco Sally. And she was a regular at Studio 54. In the course of the movie, like, there comes a point where it's like, I think the New Year's Eve party, 1979 going into 1980, she overdoses on cocaine and dies on the dance floor, and it's this whole thing where like, stop, they turn on the lights, and they're trying to revive her, but she's gone. It's
a pivotal moment for Ryan Phillippe's character in realizing that the party wasn't all it was cracked up to be to begin with. There's this whole, which maybe we can go into right after this, is a whole realization of him being an object rather than being valued. That kind of comes to fruition in his relationship with Dottie. Yeah, and lights come up. They realize she's passed. A bunch of people carry her out. It's kind of this somber moment, and then lights turn off, disco music comes back on, the party continues, but he's really, he's really shook by this. And, Mike Myers is taking him aside after this and is going like, hey, look, I'm sorry, we'll cry about it later. We've got to, we got to just keep going. The show's got to go on. Princess Grace is here. We got to do it. And Ryan Phillippe is saying like, no, this is wrong. We did this to her. This place did this to her. And he's like trying to make this moral statement about like what's been going on here is bad and wrong, and this is bad and we should be ashamed. I have a lot of thoughts about that, but the biggest thing that I just want to draw a line under is that I see this old lady who has been going to the hottest nightclub in the world every night, 80 years old. Oh, she's lived through the flu pandemic and the Great Depression and 2 world wars, and she dies of a cocaine overdose at a New Year's Eve party at Studio 54. I kind of feel like that's awesome. That's a really cool way to die, is to live to a ripe old age and die surrounded by people you love. In a place that you love. Obviously it's like, yes, it's sad that she's gone and they all loved her, but I feel like the takeaway from that isn't like, oh, what an awful place that killed her. It's like, wow, this place is special that she loved it so much, and that it also and that they let her like be in here, and that this place, like, I don't know. I feel like, and the movie then at this point is trying to take this moral stand about like, it's wrong what we do here, this is bad. And Ryan Phillippe, this is when he's like, I've got to find Neve Campbell and get out and start my life over. But it's like, he has a exchange with Mike Myers where he's like, I lost a friend tonight, and he goes, no, you lost someone who I can't remember how he phrased it. He's like, I lost a friend, you just lost someone that liked to look at you.
Yeah, exactly. And so I mean, I get I get the fact that yes, there's things about the club that are bad. Yes, I agree that like, okay, him having this realization about being an object or whatever, and he wanting to humanize himself, basically, sure. But I just feel like late in the movie, there seems to be this trend towards, oh no, everything that we've been doing, all this fun we've been having has been wrong and bad. And it's like, well, that's not, I don't think that, like, because I feel like there's a lot of bad things about Studio 54, but it was also a place that seemed to make a lot of people very happy, and that had a very and that the movie has been presenting as this magical wonderland where anything is possible, and the movie just turns around and starts condemning it right at the end, which is very kind of confused. Like, it's very muddled from a narrative standpoint.
It is one of the weaker points of the movie, because it at this point, and I'm just repeating myself at this point, of not knowing what was cut for reshoots or, just edited out, but by the end, there's no discerning what is the evil influence. Is it the culture and Studio 54, or is it specifically Steve Rubell and what he's nurturing?
Yes.
And it should be the latter, but it's so muddled, as you're saying, that you can't make heads or tails of it.
It gets even more twisted then, because as the movie's ending and the voiceover comes back talking about how, like, 54 went out of business after the IRS shut them down, and then, then the club reopened, but the corporations had taken it over, and the corporations did what corporations always do, make everything safe. But it's like, but you were just making the point that the hard partying drug behavior is immoral, and now you're saying, oh, gross, they made it safe. And so that doesn't make sense. And then on a whole other level, you look at it and it's like, well, what he's describing, a corporation taking something beautiful and unique and then ruining it by trying to make it safe, that's literally what Disney and Miramax did to this movie. Like, this... They had, God. There's this movie that was like, a piece, a queer point of view about this piece of history that was really important, and then basically based off of bad reviews from one test audience in Long Island who didn't like the fact that there was gay stuff in it, they turned it into a TGI Fridays.
Do you think that was Mark Christopher, like, writing a little dig at Miramax and Disney, like?
God,
very
I
subtly.
Hope so. Yeah,
there's a commentary on the director's cut that I'm going to listen to, and I can't wait to hear 2 hours of him explaining all of the story behind this.
Yeah, and I've in reading some of the interviews about it, like, my Mark Christopher, I feel like was just done so dirty here, and God, he was trying to be good and trying to do right by the people who financed the film. Like, he was agreeing to, like, okay, you guys think we should do reshoots? Yeah, sure, we'll try to find a way that it'll work. And even in the press, when the movie came out, he was saying, like, yeah, they had some reshoots they wanted to do, but, I think we all worked together and made something that we can all be proud of. Like, he was trying to toe the company line, trying to protect his reputation. And
what he gets for it is a movie that makes a little bit more than its budget, but then is never given another opportunity to direct a major studio film.
Exactly.
I mean, not that he hasn't worked since then, but not to this level.
And, and I think about this again in the context of Boogie Nights, because, the studio, New Line Cinema, got really antsy about Boogie Nights because, like, sometime between shooting and editing, Showgirls came out, NC-17 flopped hard, and suddenly they're very worried about, like, wait, people aren't going to go for a movie with sex in it. There was this big battle over what the movie was going to turn into. Paul Thomas Anderson was really mean and bitchy and fought for his movie and managed to get it protected, and ultimately I think that's just, like, Paul Thomas Anderson was able to do that because he was low-key kind of a Nepo baby. His family comes from Hollywood. He has more background. Also, he's a straight guy making a movie about straight people stuff. And it was just, he had more resources to go to war on behalf of his movie, and fortunately was able to, and that great movie came out. And it's just, I wish that Mark Christopher had the resources and support to fight for his movie, but also... It's a thing that we've learned is that it's very difficult to fight back against Harvey Weinstein, and this was at the height of his power.
Yeah. Before we get off of the Dottie, and her real name's Mona, in a kind of a touching scene where Ryan Phillippe, as you said, gets chlamydia, has to go get medication, and his wallet's empty, but Mona happens to be there, or Dottie, I should say, outside of the club, and she's with her grandchild, in a kind of a really... kind of interesting perspective on the character. Shows her, like, hey, we must live close to each other. my name's Mona outside of the club.
Yeah.
And she puts money in his hand to buy the chlamydia medication.
Yeah.
And they have this touching moment where they connect to each other as humans,
Yeah.
which is important because, and maybe we can segue into talking about the people he meets at the club and the things that he's invited to.
Mhm.
She sees him as a real person, as kind of a kindred soul in this world, looking for, whatever it is that people look for when they go to Studio 54.
Yeah.
And that's what, he makes it into a moral issue by the end, but it should play as a character revelation when she dies. Like there's a personal investment in that character dying.
Yeah.
But I want to mention real quick that Dottie is played by legend Queen Ellen Dow, maybe not the original rapping granny, but she's the original cinematic rapping granny from The Wedding Singer, and also very famously in Wedding Crashers. But she's just had a stellar career with over 100 credits, and she died at 101. So, good for her.
I listen, I hope that she died happy, but also I low-key hope that she died of a cocaine overdose at her favorite nightclub. But really, whatever. I hope she died doing whatever was making her happy at that time.
Agreed. Okay, here's where I think we should go with this. Let's look at this movie in the different relationships that Ryan Phillippe has throughout. And I want to hold off on talking about Breckin, Meyer, and Salma Hayek, who we have not even mentioned yet.
We need to talk about them, so we just can't let this episode end without covering that.
Of course. I won't, because Salma Hayek is fire always.
We can't cut Salma Hayek out of this podcast the way she was largely cut out of this movie.
Okay, here's where I want to start with this, is talking about Shane meeting Billy Auster. And I guess that can lead us very easily into talking about Salma Hayek. Billy Auster being the pop star that Ryan Phillippe meets because Salma Hayek, who wants to be a music star of her own, gives him some cocaine and says, "Hey, she likes cocaine. Would you set up a meet-up for the two of us?"
I feel like everybody at the club likes cocaine, Salma Hayek. I don't think that is that unique of a character trait.
But Ryan Phillippe brings over this little vial of cocaine on a platter, like a little serving tray.
So classy.
Just very, very sleek move. Okay, we can circle back to talking about her in relation to Salma Hayek in a minute, but from this kind of meet cute, it's not really a meet cute, but from this introduction of this character, she looks at Ryan Phillippe and she's like, "Okay, I'll meet your friend because you're cute or you're beautiful and I want to have fun with you." And they end up having sex. They go back to her place.
Yeah.
He starts, having sex with her. They do the sex stuff.
No. Just describe it, Landon. What are they doing?
They're doing body works together.
Yeah. The Beastie Boys talked about this. They're body moving.
Fat Boy Slim remix. There's a moment when right after they have, is it right after? No, it's right before they have sex, where she's got him and she's dressing him in the mirror, and she wraps her arms around him and puts her hands down the front of his pants, and he's staring at himself in the mirror and watching her do this. And after they have sex and she kind of she comes and passes out, it's the first kind of turn for his character to realize, oh, she doesn't give a shit about me. I was something at that club for her to take home. I was an object. I was a souvenir from the club. It's something the movie doesn't really give a lot of depth to. Yeah. But it then comes to fruition the second time we see him with her, which is a dinner party that he's invited to. He brings Salma Hayek, but she's there, and a bunch of other high-end, almost dignitary type of people who attend the club are sitting around a dinner table, and they're so fascinated by this the new bartender Shane 54. Oh my God, you're so beautiful. You're such a beautiful little troglodyte.
Yeah,
and
because he doesn't know who Errol Flynn is. He can't keep up with their Algonquin round table ass dinner table discussion.
And what I found kind of interesting, and I wish that there was more of, and I'm hoping in the director's cut they go deeper into this idea of, I'm not valued at this club except for my body or except for the objectification of me as a commodity.
Yeah.
And that would propel him down a darker route of drugs, sex, rock and roll, or disco. Should the case be
hopefully all disco, no rock and roll. Yeah, I would hope that too, because his character is not very interesting here because they have chopped him into kind of just a basic morality play of like, oh, I had a good time, but it's bad to have a good time. Whereas it's like, I feel like I see hints of a more kind of dark, more complicated, more interesting character here. In that scene where they're having sex and then she comes and passes out, he's on top of her and then continues thrusting while looking at himself in the mirror doing it, which is, I think, poor behavior and not something I endorse, but also, like, if that's part of a portrait of a guy who's not really a great guy, a guy who's doing really morally bad stuff beyond just dancing at a club and doing some cocaine, which the movie seems to think is the worst thing you can do, like, that is a hint at something bigger and darker and more interesting to latch onto in this movie, and I'm excited to see where that goes and what that is, because this scene of him looking at himself having sex, like, she has made an object of him, and then he is also making an object of her and objectifying himself in his... Yeah, there's layers and complexity there that the movie as presented is not interested in engaging with.
There was a moment... Go with me on this for a second.
There
was a moment as they were going into the basement for the first time, which is like where the big celebrity hangout was in Studio 54.
Such as we see it, yeah.
Yeah. I'm very curious to see what type of shots were deleted from this cut, because it really, in drawing the comparisons to Boogie Nights, this was more like showing me characters doing things as opposed to making me experience what the characters were doing.
Yeah.
You look at Boogie Nights and it does such a great job, even from that like opening Scorsese shot going in and out of the club at the beginning. You get the vibe of where they are and what it feels like to kind of be swirling around this world. And when they were walking down into the basement, it's just like the camera was static, and then they walked down and it panned with them and then kind of followed them down the hall from behind. I didn't feel at all immersed into the characters and the world that they were in. I was just being shown it. And I feel like that is true of a lot of the character work that exists in this cut.
Yeah.
Where I never quite in on what Ryan Phillippe is experiencing. What are his highs and lows? What does he want, and why? What is it that makes him go down these darker roads?
Yeah, and what is he doing when he goes down these dark roads? The camera kind of always cuts it. He's shirtless in a room full of wealthy older men, and then the camera cuts away, and it's like, and he's famous. I don't know why.
There's a really blatant example of something that got cut out, where he goes to see Mike Rubell in his office, and he's asking to get his friends on the list. We didn't mention Mark Ruffalo playing one of his friends in two scenes. Yeah.
Mark Ruffalo not good looking enough to get into Studio 54. You heard it here first, folks.
Right. But Steve Rubell gives him a bunch of drugs in his hands, and it's like the first time that it's maybe not the first time he takes drugs in the film, but it's like the first like excess of drugs that he gets.
Yeah.
And it cuts from that scene to him seeing Neve Campbell walk into the club for the first time, and he's with Salma Hayek in the coat check area, and he's just sweating, looking at, gaping at Neve Campbell walking in, and Salma Hayek's like, "You are a mess. We gotta get you cleaned up if you're gonna go talk to her." And it's
we
like,
gotta get you more drugs.
If you weren't paying attention from like, oh, drugs in his hand to like sweaty mess, it would kind of be hard to connect the dots of like, oh, he's like tripping balls right now.
Yeah.
So there's clearly something missing, that was cut out of the movie between those two scenes.
Yeah. I think we need to talk about Salma Hayek. Can we talk about Salma Hayek right now? We got to talk about Salma Hayek.
Always. I'm ready to talk about her for the rest of the episode.
Salma Hayek wants to be a disco queen. She works, as kind of coat check waitress. Like she's an employee at at Studio 54, and I am led to believe there is a lot more in the director's cut. But she just sort of is like around to talk to Ryan Phillippe. There's hints at him and her having something, even though she's married to Breckin Meyer. And there's like one scene where they kind of like start to kiss a little bit in their apartment, but then Breckin Meyer catches them and gets really mad and destroys a bunch of her recording equipment. But then, like 2 scenes later, everybody's friends again, owing to the chopped up nature of the movie. Salma Hayek has said in retrospect that she regrets doing the movie. I think just because I don't think that her role is outright degrading, really. It's just she's got nothing to do. She's kind of just the wife, the girlfriend, the pretty lady who people talk to between scenes of different pretty ladies.
I mean, there's hints of a deeper character there.
Sure.
The whole music career thing. I mean, she gets a whole musical performance that is what's happening when Dottie dies.
Can I be honest? This is nothing against Salma Hayek. This is against Anita, her character. I don't think she's I don't think her character's a good singer. I don't think that the song is particularly good. I think that she's not a famous musician for a reason. I think it's because she kind of sucks. I think her music is so bad that it kills Disco Dottie, and frankly, that is that I cannot forgive. Great performance.
Well, I want to. Okay, so what's interesting there is, it made me kind of contextualize love triangles in movies, in that love triangles aren't really triangles. They're more love V's. Because you've got two people vying for...
They can't see what you're doing.
Well, they don't need to. You know what a V looks like, don't you? It's a triangle that's not connected.
I thought you said love these, and you were just you're touching your two fingers together. Okay, love these. That makes sense.
V. The letter V becomes, between TUV, between U and X. TUV, W, U and W. The letter between U and W.
Great, okay. Now it's crystal clear. Go on. So it's not a love triangle, it's a love V, because it's just connected at one point.
The traditional storytelling trope of a love triangle is actually a love V, where there are two parties that vie for one party, and that one party can go in either direction.
Yeah.
But I think the majority of what was cut out of this movie was a legitimate love triangle, where it's between Ryan Phillippe, Salma Hayek, Breckin Meyer, and Breckin Meyer and Ryan Phillippe.
Yes.
And I'm very excited to see what that looks like, because I think between Salma Hayek and Breckin Meyer gets the worst of it in this movie, because
true,
the first half, and it feels like most of the reshoots come in the second half of the movie, and a lot of the editing tricks seem to be making this into a more traditional story.
Yeah.
And story values, storytelling, all of the above. So Breckin Meyer in the first half gets really interesting stuff in it, like the scene with Steve Rubell, where he's like, I love my wife. He's almost okay. Here's another, like, an actual trope that always makes me roll my eyes. Breckin Meyer's like really unsure what to do about this. He's not exactly tempted, but to have Steve Rubell suck his cock, as the dialogue goes in the movie.
Yeah.
But he's like, I really want the bartender job. This is like my boss. I can't say no to him exactly. Mm-hmm. He's feeling the pressure of it, and he's like starts to undo his belt. And then the bodyguard that had carried Mike Myers in is sitting in a chair, not paying attention to anything, reading a comic book, and then just laughs at the comic book as if comic books are inherently funny because they're comics. i.e. comic equals laugh, haha. But he's reading Red Sonja, the Conan character. which is just ridiculous.
Deep character. Now, do you think that's one of Steve Rubell's collection? Like, do you think that he has a whole lot of comic books and that he's really into it and that's what he spends the Studio 54 money on? Or do you think that the bodyguard had that in his pocket for like, if I'm gonna have to sit in the room while my boss gives some dude a blowjob tonight, I need something to read. My copy of War and Peace is too big to fit in my blazer, so I'll bring this instead.
Here's my read on this of the characters. Salma Hayek, what she kind of turns into in this. Breckin, Meyer. There are some early scenes when Ryan Phillippe is first getting inducted into the club, where he meets up with the other bartenders and busboys and coat check people at a diner afterward, and they all spill out their pockets from what they found left over by patrons. Yeah. And then they all decide who's going to take what, and it's kind of a camaraderie scene. Mm-hmm. And it felt like it was setting up much more of a God. I'm getting annoyed by the amount of comparisons I'm making to Boogie Nights, but it's
impossible. You can't not.
It is. It felt like it was trying to set up more of a tapestry of characters rather than more of an Altman-esque sort of myriad of characters, rather than this character plays into the story this way. Yeah. Where each character could have lived out their own little arcs by the end of it without going, well, how does his story wrap up in the way it pertains to Ryan Phillippe? Yeah. Which is what it seems like the editing is trying to do by the end of this movie.
It feels... It gets so much clumsier in the way stuff is cut together. Like, by the end of the movie, there's this scene where, after the whole raid, Steve Rubell has gotten out of prison and he has, one last birthday bash at the club or something where he gets up and he gives this speech to everybody. And it's all these shots of Mike Myers up on the platform giving a speech to everybody, intercut with stuff that seems to have been shot months later of, Ryan Phillippe and Salma Hayek and Breckin Meyer out on the dance floor, kind of seeing each other and interacting, but we don't hear what they're saying. There's voiceover explaining what it is. There's you think that this speech that Mike Myers is giving is going to be really poignant and stuff, but instead he just makes a bunch of kind of one-off jokes, and we get lots of reactions of people laughing, and then shots of him looking kind of towards the camera and a shot of Ryan Phillippe to suggest, oh, that's their last moment. Okay, they looked at each other, see?
That end scene is so, cringy that, everyone gets their little acknowledgments.
Yes.
Breckin Meyer and Salma Hayek, they're going to be okay. And you know what? Breckin Meyer and Ryan Phillippe, they're maybe not friends anymore, but they're okay. And they all can acknowledge and put into context what their life with Steve Rubell was at that time. And they see Steve Rubell for what he is, and they look at each other and they're all okay, you're cool. We're cool. We're all cool. We're all going to be fine.
And we don't need to hear any dialogue. We don't need to see their mouths moving and hear the words coming out. We can have it ADR'd to us by one person.
Also, what was it about 1990s films where there's so many scenes of a crowd watching someone on stage give a speech?
I don't know, man. I don't.
And cheering at just the most ludicrous and mundane stuff.
I don't know how many different biopics are there though that start with someone getting up to receive an award and starting to make a speech to a crowd, and then they look off contemplatively. Maybe that's just a bigger part of cinema.
Just Chaplin. Just the movie Chaplin.
I also so long as we're talking about sloppy editing, when the club has been raided and it's Ryan Phillippe basically gets chucked out of the club shirtless and is out on the street and it's dark out and is walking away from the club, and then he turns and looks over his shoulder, and then we cut to Mike Myers being dragged out of the club by the FBI and put into the back of a police car, and he's yelling at them. Now, the Mike Myers scene, it is clearly early morning. The morning sun is up. There is media gathered around, like news crews and everything, and reporters. But when Ryan Phillippe has left the club, it's still the middle of the night. But so you're cutting between Phillippe on the dark street, looking over his shoulder, Mike Myers getting pulled out. Oh, you let me go, unhand me, you brutes! And it's the morning, and then back to Phillippe at night, like looking again, and then like a couple times they were so desperate, like clearly scenes meant to take place at different times, different parts of the movie stitched together in such an awkward way. It really just feels like it is so obvious at the end, like that is where most of the work came in, and it really just feels like the plane has just been, the plane is barely landing. There's like bits falling off of it. It's the real Boeing story. Like it's leaking fuel. It barely touches the ground.
And I'll tell you, going from the raid scene, which we should segue into talking about the crimes of this movie to wrap this up. But
and of Grindelwald,
going from the
too.
raid scene, the final party that gets raided into the we're all coming back together again for the reunion party. There's like 2 seconds between those two scenes. We don't see any of the characters outside of the club living their lives, like having to make decisions. Like the movie just decides to go fuck characterization at this point. We're just gonna do some VO, and we'll decor this thing.
I was
reference.
I was managing a couple of restaurants, and I had my own place, and and Greg and Anita had bought a house out in the country, and they were doing real good. Everything was fine.
Before we finish up with Salma Hayek and Breckin Meyer, I want to just take a second to contextualize where this falls in their career, particularly Salma Hayek. Breckin Meyer is, as I said, I think would put him as part of the Splat Pack.
Yeah, Splat Plaque.
He did a lot of TV shows, but I think kind of broke through with Clueless in 1995 as the love interest to Brittany Murphy. He was also in The Craft with Neve Campbell in 96.
Yeah.
One episode of Party of Five. So he's kind of, coming in and out of all those things. And then the same year, he does a major Splat Pack movie, which is Can't Hardly Wait. That has Ethan Embry, that has Jennifer Love Hewitt, which I would tangentially put in there because she was in I Know What You Did Last Summer and Party of Five.
I think she counts. Yeah.
So that's where he falls. This feels like if the director's cut had been released, it might have been a sliding. Actually, this feels like it could have been a sliding doors moment for Mike Myers too.
Yeah.
Where like had the actual dramatic version of this been released, that their careers could have gone in a different direction.
There's so much more that I could say about that, and I feel like something that I regret in my career as a podcaster is I've not ever spent a lot of time talking about how a guy who's famous as a comedy actor could have had a really robust career as a dramatic actor if things had turned out slightly differently. It's something I've literally never discussed before, and we probably could go into that at more length, but we just simply do not have time.
We don't. Let me talk about Salma Hayek real quick, and then let's talk about the crimes of this film.
Yes.
She kind of came on the scene in late 80s, 1988. She had some odds and ends credits until Robert Rodriguez cast her in Desperado, which was a crossover hit with Antonio Banderas as well, kind of introducing him. She immediately went on to star in his segments of Four Rooms with Tarantino and a couple other actors. Then in From Dusk Till Dawn. And she becomes a mainstay of Rodriguez movies. But she kind of takes a bigger step in starring alongside Matthew Perry at the height of his Friends fame with Fools Rush In. She's playing the romantic interest, co-starring with that.
She's playing the beautiful woman in that movie as well. Really typecast in the 90s and to this day.
Yeah, and she does some action flicks like Fair Game, the Cindy Crawford action flick with one of the Baldwins, and Fled. That's kind of where she is going into this movie. So she doesn't have that like big breakthrough thing. It would only be 3 years after this, in 2001, that she would do Frida and like cement herself as the institution that she is. What I find interesting, she hasn't really even shown her comedic chops. Maybe a little bit in Four Rooms, but I think by now, 2024, Salma Hayek, in looking back, has so much range, and she's just so good in everything she does. I think she's one of the more like natural talents in this movie. You look at
Yeah.
her, and regardless of how thankless the role might be in some instances, she brings such a authenticity and liveliness to the role that it's hard to deny the talent that she has.
There is a scene that I realize was definitely shot as part of the reshoots, where it's just this. It has no connection to the rest of the movie. It's like, oh yeah,
my God.
on the week,
The dance scene.
Well, there's many dance scenes, but the dance class, like, it's
The
on the
dance
weekends.
class. Oh my
Voiceover
God.
explains to us that on the weekends, Anita would teach disco dancing to suburbanites who wanted to be hip.
Oh.
And it's this scene of her and a bunch of bridge and tunnel Goombas trying to teach them dance moves, and then basically this dorky kid does the splits and breaks his leg. But it's like, the scene is dumb, but watching her kind of heckling this room full of dorks trying to get them to dance better, like, that is fun. She's really fun in that scene. She then pulls Ryan Phillippe up to dance with her to try and, like, show these people the ropes, and they're dancing a little too sexily for Breckin Meyer's tastes. But it's she brings so much to that, which is very, very clearly a scene that, like, two hack writers were sitting around like 70s nightclub. Maybe there's she's teaching people how to dance. We can rent one room. I don't know why the writers sound like Bridge and Tunnel.
I know why.
Goombas.
I know why. Because this, and maybe it is the kind of the nature of doing reshoots 2 months after you finish a movie. There are a lot of scenes in this where I'm like, it's capital A acting, because they're putting on New Jersey and New York accents.
Yeah,
like,
there you go.
Hey, we know we're acting here because we're doing a movie and we're speaking like this. You know what I mean? Are you Italian? Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to give you some party drugs for this next scene here.
I get that level of try hard even applies to the writers. It's like, hey, I got an apartment out in Chatsworth. Hey, I got here on the Red Line today. Nah, just kidding. I took the 405.
I really have to get into character when I write. So, if we're gonna make this work, you have to understand and accept that about me.
That's why.
That's my character writer talking to another writer that is in that room with him.
Landon,
or someone at the coffee shop next to him.
Yeah, exactly.
Like my process. I got to talk out all my lines over this cup of Joe in a coffee bean and tea leaf.
Your biopic, it doesn't start with you giving a speech to a crowd of people. It starts with you giving a speech to everyone else at the coffee bean and tea leaf, trying to explain that you have to talk in an outrageous Italian New Jersey accent before you start writing. Okay, you want to talk about the crimes of this movie? Can I start with a crime?
Yes.
A recurring plot point early on, Ryan Phillippe, like, hey, Dad, can I borrow the car? I want to go to 54. Hey, I gotta borrow the car. I gotta go to 54. Motherfucker, you live in Jersey City, New York. Greater metropolitan area has some of the best public transit on earth. You get on the fucking subway. You can be there in like no time. Early on,
right.
him and his friends, Mark Ruffalo included, it's like they take the car, they go into the city, they're pulling up outside of 54, there's all these cars, it's jammed up in the street because everyone wants to be in 54, and like him and his friend jump out and his other friend is in the car. He's like, hey, what do we do? It's like, hey, there's nowhere to park. It's like, yeah, don't drive into the city. It's just...
Yeah. All right, listen, you're complaining about me pluralizing actors' butt cheeks with their last name. I've done that once. I have 1 brick in movie memory machine lore with that. You have 4 bricks for 4 movies about public transit.
I mean, you know what? Fine. I'll own that. I think that frankly, if more people used public transit, the world would be a better place. If more people referred to male actors' butt cheeks using a pluralized version of the actor's last name, I don't know that society would necessarily be any better. Maybe that's a bold hot take. I don't know.
We haven't tried it.
Okay.
I'm out here trailblazing, trying to get that going.
Okay.
Just to see.
Okay, let's do both. I'll start referring to butt cheeks in that way, but you have to start riding the bus. All of you listening, okay. Same. Okay, first crime done and dusted. What other crimes?
Okay, all right. So, let's just start with the overview of the crimes here. There's clearly the IRS issue.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, what the movie wants us to track the most, because it's what closes the studio down.
The super exciting financial crimes in your movie about dancing, sex, and cocaine.
There's also this through line of drug dealing with a character that the IRS interrogates at one point that is like he's the supplier. It's weird. The detail of the crime is not given to us almost at all. We get an idea that Breckin Meyer, or who is it? Someone is skimming. Okay, so Steve Rubell, the actual crime is the owners were skimming off of the top of the take each night before they would report their earnings to the IRS.
Yes.
So there's a whole bunch of money that they were pocketing that they weren't claiming on their taxes.
In reality, the proprietors of 54 were skimming 60% of the profits off the top before they did their paperwork for the government, which is like, listen, Steve Rubell embodies the be gay, do crimes better than anybody. We must stand.
But then there's the drug aspect of it, which it almost it's not given enough attention. But is it that we're supposed to take that the IRS is looking for an in to the inner workings of the money system, and they're using the drug dealer because he's the one that's getting paid with the skimmed money?
I mean, I don't know. There's this one scene of the guy sitting in their office, and they're like, basically, oh yeah, we've got you for the drugs. What do you know? And then the next thing we see, like 20 minutes later, is the IRS pulling up outside. I think we're supposed to believe that, this guy was the thread they pulled on that unraveled the whole operation. Although, also, I don't necessarily need to, have an explanation for how the IRS got wind of this, because they literally see Steve Rubell on TV on a talk show bragging about how he doesn't pay taxes. Like nothing that's going on at this club seems particularly subtle. Like I can believe that law enforcement figured it out.
Well, yeah, but I mean, narratively speaking, you can't just have the IRS raid at the end as like the police commissioner shutting down Monty Python and the Holy Grail just to end the movie. I mean, you need some sort of narrative thread to follow before that happens.
The narrative thread can just be as simple as like garbage bags full of cash and nobody keeping any books. Like there can just be, you can show shoddy and very clearly shady financial practices throughout the film, and then have the IRS show up. Like that completes the through line. We don't need the tax enforcement procedural aspect of, but how did they find out? Was it admissible in court?
I think this is chaos theory. Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, chaos theory in action here, where we are two drops of water going off in different directions, even though we're dropping in the same place. Where I kind of feel like the way the movie is, we both agree, is ridiculous in terms of how this crime is, tracked. You're saying less of it, and I'm saying more of it. I think it needs to be one or the other, just not what we get.
Pick a lane. Much, again, kind of like Life or Something Like It. This one of this movie's great faults is that it is in the middle on a lot of stuff because they are not letting it commit to any one thing, so it winds up being none of the things.
Yeah. I feel like if they had gone more with it, it would have felt more Scorsese-esque. In fact, it's kind of interesting to think of like Killers of the Flower Moon, which was much more loyal to the book before in script phase until he ran it by some members of the Osage, and they're like, our story needs a perspective, and Scorsese just decides, okay, well, let's just throw out the book and tell the story that hasn't been told.
Worked, I'd say. Good choice there.
So maybe I don't know, maybe we need a different perspective. This should have minimize that to like just Brendan Fraser and John Lithgow showing up at Studio 54 at the very end, and
Jesse Plemons knocking on the door of Studio 54 2/3 of the way through the movie. Oh God, Plemons would.
Excuse me, are you doing any IRS crimes in here?
We heard that there's some tax evasion going on because they talked about it on the TV show. Also,
God.
if only Lily Gladstone was in this movie, that would be cool too. What if this movie had all the celebrities who I like now, in addition to the celebrities that I like from the past?
How about that? Okay, you know what we didn't talk about, and I feel like maybe this is a good way to wrap up. We didn't talk about where this falls in Ryan Phillippe's career.
No, we didn't.
Which I think is important. Ryan Phillippe, he's got kind of a slow burn start. I wasn't able to find the exact credit for this, but I found it interesting that he is credited as playing the first gay teenager on TV.
Oh, okay.
Which kind of like makes it a little more understandable why he was on the radar to be chosen for this, at least to get an audition.
Yeah.
I find it interesting also that Ryan Phillippe and Breckin Meyer are best friends in real life.
Yeah.
And curious to listen to the commentary to see, how that played into how they played off of each other in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, look, from what I've read, Ryan Phillippe is pretty unhappy with the way that this movie got cut. I think he was way more on board with what was originally written and the role he originally played.
So Ryan Phillippe is someone that is both not unfamiliar to new queer cinema, and definitely a cornerstone of the Splat Pack.
Yeah.
So in 1997, the year before this movie, he was in Greg Araki's Nowhere, which is a seminal work of the new queer cinema. But in 1997, he was also in I Know What You Did Last Summer. So kind of playing two sides of that card in the same year. Then he does this movie. So you can kind of see of the Splat Pack, he's got the more dramatic career developing.
Yeah.
And he goes from this movie into Cruel Intentions in 1999 with Sarah Michelle Gellar and Selma Blair.
Yeah.
Which was between I Know What You Did Last Summer and Cruel Intentions, like it makes him one of the Splat Pack's poster boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in a kind of a level of fame that I feel like he never really reclaimed. Like he never got back up to that level, I think, after the fact.
Yeah, he's interesting. I'm going to pull up some of his credits here just to look at them. He even though he doesn't hit that height again, he makes interesting choices that just don't quite play out, like Way of the Gun. And speaking of Robert Altman, he was in Gosford Park.
Oh.
He played I think the older brother in Igby Goes Down, the Kieran Culkin indie film.
Yeah.
What I really remember, of course, the Clint Eastwood Flags of Our Fathers. I kind of remember him cropping back up in God, what was it? Maybe I'm confusing with someone.
Yeah.
He was in Crash. The Oscar-winning Crash.
Okay, so you know what? Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe his career went better than I expected it did. I mean, he's been in a lot of fairly big, heavy-hitting movies. Oh, the one about getting sent back to Iraq or something. Yeah.
Oh, and so you could see in 2001 where he was like his career was kind of heading. He stars with Rachel Lee Cook, who is also tangentially in the Splat Pack. Josie and the Pussycats represent. And Claire Forlani and Tim Robbins in the tech thriller. After tech thrillers were really big in the 90s, they were still trying in the 2001s.
Is this Antitrust?
Antitrust, yep.
Yeah, Antitrust. I remember Antitrust.
Maybe the machine's going to throw that one at us someday.
I hope it does. If you want more recollections of movies I watched with my parents 22 years ago, that would be a lark. Okay, if you have more filmography stuff to say about him, say it. I just have a thing I want to mention about his performance before I forget.
No, I was just gonna keep reading off the stuff, but I just to finish my diatribe about him, I think he's a very interesting actor that is underserved by the movies that he ends up getting, and honestly, it feels like a lot of the movies he ends up getting are interfered with. I think Stop Loss was another example of that, where just they aren't maybe the movies he signs on for.
Yeah, which has gotta hurt when it keeps happening. Like you keep thinking this is going to be the one that the studio doesn't butcher, and then once again it gets butchered.
Yeah.
What he makes a lot of choices in this movie with his character that I think on a performance level are really fun. And the one that stuck out to me very early on that let me kind of realize, oh, there's more going on in this movie than meets the eye, is he's talking to his friends. He's trying to convince Mark Ruffalo and his other pal to drive into the city with him to go to 54. And he's talking about all the famous people who are there. And he's saying, like, oh, you know, that actress from All of My Children is there. Like, not All My Children, the name of it, but All of My Children is how he pronounces it. Yeah. Or he says, oh, and they got that, Jacqueline Bisset is going to be there. Like, the way he is mispronouncing the names of the famous people who are going to be there, the way he's mispronouncing, like, the name of the show, it's just...
Yeah. He doesn't even know who Errol Flynn is.
He does, yes, you're right. He is a troglodyte after all, a very handsome troglodyte. He doesn't even know who Truman Capote is, and Truman Capote's like right there at the bar. I don't know.
Embarrassing.
It's funny. Like, immediately I was like, okay, I feel like I'm in good hands with this performance, even if I'm not in good hands with this editing. Okay.
Yeah. So I think I'm not ready to wage a verdict on this movie until we watch the director's cut, but
sure.
I think I can talk a little bit about why I think this film was forgotten.
Sure, of course.
I'm kind of curious. I'll give you, if you're ready, I'll give you opening salvo on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, my verdict is that this cut of this movie, I think, I'm ready to weigh in. I think that this should be left drifting in space, and I think that Mark Christopher would agree with. I mean, I would assume that if I had poured so much of myself into making something deeply personal and meaningful to me, and one of the worst predators in Hollywood completely fucked it up, and my name was still attached to it, I would also want it to be forgotten. This cut of the movie. I think the reason that it didn't connect with people is because, again, there's no there. This movie does a very, this movie is somewhat effective at capturing the vibe of Boogie Nights. It is good at capturing, we're all dressed up in 70s clothes. We're at a nightclub. There is a needle drop on a really good disco song as we cut away to a bunch of people in a car driving into the city. There's those moments that are just sort of viscerally fun to watch. It's fun to see people in a nightclub and dancing in a movie and have the camera kind of be moving around. But because there is no thesis statement to it, there is no deeper, we are using this as window dressing to tell a story about this thing. There is never this thing that happens. We never get a sense of the characters, what their relationships are, what they've learned, what this all means for them. There's nothing to hold on to, so it's not a thing that is making an impression with people, that's not being remembered. So there's that. And then there's also the fact that it is coming less than a year after Boogie Nights, a movie that has the fun vibe and also all of the everything else. So I think this movie was forgotten because it was cut up to the point that it's insubstantial, and it's overshadowed by a far superior movie that everybody else saw and liked.
Yeah, and you know what, though? I mean, I would be a hypocrite if I didn't... If I used that criteria, that last bit of criteria, to disqualify a film from being remembered, because when I look at huge films from, the 70s that created an exploitation boom, your Exorcist, your Jaws, your Gremlins, there's a ton of fun movies that come out of those that, aren't the original thing and are so blatantly trying to be the original thing. I would lose 90% of Italian cinema if I did that.
Sure.
And I'm not willing yet to wage a verdict whether this should be remembered or not, because I kind of feel like if the director's cut is worth remembering, and it seems like there's a big cult following around it.
Yeah.
I would want to include this version with it as a kind of Terry Gilliam's
Brazil,
Love Conquers All version of Brazil that the studio cut, that Terry Gilliam includes on every single release of the film, so that he goes, look at this shit that they tried to pull.
Look at these dumb motherfuckers showing their ass. Look how stupid Sid Sheinberg is.
So I'm not willing to wage the verdict until next week. But as far as why this is forgotten, I think you touch on the majority of it. It's sanitized beyond memorability. It's a poor release timing after Boogie Nights. It's an odd placement in the stars' careers. There's a lot of like people up and coming, but getting big either right before or right after this, and then that kind of overshadowing the kind of bad reception of this movie. The theatrical release strategy that we talked about at the very beginning, where Boogie Nights was the slow rollout, word of mouth style. This is just like over sanitized. Looks like it's capitalizing on Boogie Nights. But I think even with all of that aside, if a movie is successful at its intentions, you know, people are still going to gravitate toward it over time. What I think the edit of this does is it really prevents us from feeling and experiencing what the characters go through, so there's no real emotional attachment to it. That said, this maybe will go more into my verdict rather than forgotten or not. I could see this being a kind of fun hangout movie, just like Vibes sort of deal. Not the movie Vibes, which is
that's a very fun hangout movie. One of the best.
Experience unto itself.
Oh, Vibes! But, I love you, Vibes.
Like I could see putting this on in the background of a party sometime, just as like wallpaper.
Yeah, with the sound off, this cut of the movie could work. I mean, you'd miss out on the needle drops. But if you had the soundtrack from the movie playing on the speakers, and then you had this movie playing on TV with no sound, yeah.
So that's what I got for Why It Was Forgotten. Okay, well, I think at this point we're gonna watch the director's cut next week, which I'm very excited about. I'm glad that my experience with this movie is not over yet, because I'm still thinking about it, even though I've seen it twice at this point. And I still have a lot to say that we didn't even touch on that I'm looking forward to getting to next week.
Yeah, I know. This forgotten movie has proven quite memorable for both of us, and I'm so glad that it's wormed its way into our lives like this, and I'm glad the machine is taking us to see what the director's original vision is actually going to look like.
Yeah, I guess the machine's taking us 15 years in the future, because that's when the director's cut came out, 15 years after this movie. Yeah. So, I guess until next week, for Truman Caps, I've been Landen Solano.
And for Landen Solano, I've been Truman Caps. Let's go.
See you next week, folks.
Movie Memory Machine is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. Join our Patreon at patreon.com/gruntworkpodcast to keep the machine running. Theme song by Porky's Groove Machine. Rate us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. For more information on today's show, visit moviememorymachine.com.